Multimedia's UNO Synth Pro, the keyboard version. I have to admit, I loved the UNO, the original UNO, and I was always shocked that I loved it because, as you might know about me, I'm very, very interested in vintage interfaces and vintage analog. So a very small capacitive device with seeming limited control was not really kind of what you would expect me to like. But I got the UNO, the original one, and thought it was fantastic and it sounded great. I still couldn't believe it. It's sort of the same thing happened with the Synth Pro. When it came out, I'm like, oh, well, this is like the UNO. And I'm like, didn't I really, really love the UNO? And I'm like, yeah, I did, but I'm not sure how I could have, Anyway, so IK Multimedia contacted me and they said, hey, would you like to demo the Synth Pro? And I went entirely on, I know that I loved the original UNO, and so I guess I will. So here we are. And I have to admit, you're like, hey, isn't this an oscillator video? But the oscillator video is always like my introductory video, as you might know from all the years I've been doing this, or not. I don't know. Anyway, so back to this synthesizer. It came to me and I was like, wow, I do not really grasp this interface. This is, you'll see it's pretty straightforward, but for me, I'm used to knob per function. So at first it took me a while to kind of warm up to the Synth Pro because I'm so used to vintage synthesizers, but I also know that people who are very into vintage synthesizers were involved in the design of this. And then I heard the sound and it was just like, okay, yeah, there's something going on here. So, it's a little bit different. Basically, what you have is a 3 oscillator analog synth with 2 filters, 2 different types of filters. It's really powerful. It's small, it's compact. It has, obviously a lot of digital elements, but obviously a lot of analog elements too. And this very refined interface that is not like a traditional analog synth, but is really immediate and really functional once you come around to it. Now I'm getting old, so I get slower and slower in figuring things out, but let's dive into this synthesizer. I can never, every single time I play it, which is now a lot, I start playing, I'm like, oh my gosh, this sounds great. I really love the sound of the synthesizer. And I'm just going to say this right now because there's really no place for me to say it. This is metal. This is a chunk, like it's solid and heavy and feels like a really high quality professional synthesizer. So I know like you can't necessarily tell. I couldn't tell when I first saw like, is this red plastic? No, this is red metal. And this is a metal front plate as well. This is a really well designed and beautiful piece of solid professional equipment. You can't always tell that from the pictures. Anyway, so I just want to get all of this talking out of the way, and now only synth, no talking. I'm sorry, that's a big lie. If we want to access the oscillator section, all we have to do is press oscillator. The red light comes on, and we see, we have sort of a graph here, which will tell you where you're at and what you have access to where you're currently at. When you press oscillator, you get this top row that has the wave shape of 3 oscillators and sync and how sync will work. So that makes it really simple because on your first level of oscillator, you're just deciding what the wave shapes of the oscillators are. So right now, oscillator 1 set to a sawtooth. Goes pretty low. These are the octave buttons here. As you can tell, if there's no lights on, you are at the center octave. As you press on the negative, you go down 1 octave. And again, you'll get a flashing light to tell you you're 2 octaves down. So there are octaves. That's a sawtooth, but this does not have set wave shapes. It has variable wave shapes. You can certainly select the set wave. You can set traditional you can select traditional wave shapes, but you have to find them. This is one of the cool things about the UNO architecture is this variable wave shape. So if we turn the oscillator 1's wave all the way to the left, we have a triangle wave. This triangle has a little bit of sizzle on top, which is always nice. That means it will respond better to the filter because some triangle waves have so little higher frequencies that they're kind of pointless in regard to use with filter. If you're saying to yourself, wow, okay, couldn't it go higher than that? First of all, what are you playing with your synthesizer where you need frequencies that high? But also keep in mind that we also have access to the tuning of the oscillators. And if you want higher frequencies, you need to tune your oscillators higher. So don't worry about that, but those are the octave. That's the octave switching and what the triangle wave sounds like on all the different octaves. So let's listen to this wave shaping thing that's happening. Starting with triangle, moving into saw, moving to square, modulating pulse width. That goes up to a 98% duty cycle from, I think, 50. Let me point out something. If you start with a sawtooth wave and then you move to a triangle, what you're really talking about is the wave shaping is removing harmonics. So it's like a filter. So when you have variable wave shape like this, you have a kind of filter concept built into the oscillator alone. Now this synthesizer has 2 filters and there's a lot of functionality with those filters, but you don't even have to use them to get filtering effects because as we'll see later in the mod matrix, you can actually apply an envelope to this wave shape and have it go from sawtooth to triangle, having filtering type sounds built into the oscillator itself. Variable wave shape is really cool that way. And of course, if you wanted pulse width modulation, it's kind of built again into this variable wave shape. You would just modulate the wave on the square end of things. And since you have 3 oscillators, and they're all independently modulatable, you can have 3 different oscillators with pulse width modulation, which is always a very cool sound. When we get down to the mod matrix, remind me to demonstrate that. So we've only been using 1 oscillator this whole time to hear all these cool sounds, which are super cool. I don't know if you're noticing, this has a really rich oscillator tone. If you get somewhere between saw and triangle, you'll get this really nice low end with kind of the brightness of the sawtooth. I could go on and on about modulatable wave shape. It's awesome. But